On April 6, 1982, 12 miles southwest of Spearville, Kansas, a 34-year-old farmer named Mara Calder cut the wire off a flour sack her mother had tied shut before Mara was born. Inside were 336 pounds of open-pollinated red Kafir Milo seed. Not hybrid seed, not treated seed, not a new commercial release with a glossy brochure and a promised yield curve. Old seed, the kind of seed men at the co-op said belonged in a glass case with a typed label underneath it. By the end of that week, every farmer between Spearville and Greensburg had heard that Mara Calder was planting 62 acres of her grandmother's Copper Kafir on dryland ground that should have been put into modern hybrid Milo. They laughed because the math looked simple. The new hybrids could push 5,600 pounds an acre in a good year with nitrogen, irrigation support, and clean timing. But Mara's grandmother's line had never been bred for a pretty good year. It had been bred for the year that broke everything else. 8 summers later, on the evening of June 21st, 1990, a storm cut a 37-mile scar through Ford, Kiowa, and Edwards counties. By dark, the commercial hybrids were on the ground. By morning, one Milo field was still standing. It was Mara Calder's 62 acres. And the old seed had not won because it was old. It won because her grandmother had built a weather map into the stalk. Mara inherited the seed from 3 women who had never treated farming like guesswork. Her grandmother, Nola Voss Calder, had started the line in 1932 at the Dryland Station near Hayes, where she worked as a field assistant before the station decided that the future belonged to uniform hybrids and large seed contracts. Nola had been assigned to measure lodging after hail. That was the official job. What she actually did was walk the damaged rows after every bad storm and mark the plants that bent without snapping. She marked the ones that kept the boot protected. She marked the ones with thicker stems at the soil line. She marked the ones that could take wind from the southwest and still finish grain. The other assistants were selecting for yield in normal seasons. Nola was selecting for survival in abnormal ones. In 1939, when her work was folded into a hybrid program and the open-pollinated plots were cleared, Nola came home with 11 pounds of foundation seed in a cotton flour sack, a ledger wrapped in oilcloth, and a rule she repeated to her daughter for the rest of her life. Good years belong to the tallest number. Bad years belong to the standing stem. Her daughter, Elspeth Calder, kept the line alive after Nola's death. Every 5th summer, Elspeth planted a 3-acre refresh plot on the north edge of the home place. She rogued out weak stalks by hand. She stored the clean seed in flour sacks inside a cedar chest that sat against the cool wall of the cellar. The seed that Mara opened in 1982 was not a museum sample. It was the working reserve of a family breeding program nobody outside the Calder kitchen believed in anymore. Mara's husband had died in a combine accident 5 years earlier. Her father had died the next spring. Elspeth had died in the winter of 1981, leaving Mara the home place, the ledger, the cedar chest, and one folded note tucked into the back cover. The note was written in Elspeth's square, careful hand. Plant it when everybody tells you not to. That was all. Mara read the line so many times that the paper softened at the crease. In January of 1982, she tested the seed in pie tins on the kitchen counter. 200 kernels went between damp towels. She checked them at 6 in the morning and again before bed. After 10 days, 183 had sprouted, 91.5%. The seed was alive. In February, she cleaned the reserve by hand. In March, she rebuilt the seed boxes on the old 4-row planter, so they would meter the larger kernels without cracking them. She set the plates with a file and a caliper that still carried her father's initials scratched into the handle. On April 6th, she planted the 62 acres at 39,000 seeds per acre, in long rows that ran with the prevailing wind. By April 9th, the Spearville Co-op knew. By April 12th, the jokes had a schedule. At the counter, the men called it Nola's Memory Garden. At the elevator, they said Mara had confused inheritance with management. At the bank, the loan officer asked whether she understood what a 2,000-pound yield gap would do to a farm already carrying widow's debt. The worst part was that most of them did not sound cruel. They sounded careful. They sounded practical. They sounded careful. They sounded practical. They sounded like men trying to save a woman from a decision they had already decided was grief wearing work clothes. Vernon Pike came to the Calder gate on the 3rd Saturday of April. Vernon farmed 1,800 acres south of Mara's place. He had known her husband. He had lent parts to her father. He wore a clean straw hat, polished boots, and the patient expression of a man who believed every difficult conversation could be solved with arithmetic. Mara was kneeling at the end of a row, checking emergence, when his pickup stopped at the gate. She stood up with red dust on both knees. Vernon did not waste time. "Mara, you can still disc it under," he said. "The Co-op has Prairie Gold Hybrid on the pallet. I spoke to Don. He'll hold enough for your acres until Tuesday. I'll cover the seed until harvest." Mara brushed dust off her hands. "You came out here to offer me seed?" "I came out here to keep you from turning a crop field into a keepsake." She looked back across the 62 acres. Small green spikes had begun cutting the crust in straight lines. "It is not a keepsake," she said. "It is a weather map." Vernon sighed the way older farmers sigh when they think patience is doing the work of wisdom. "A weather map does not pay interest. It will out-yield your grandmother's line by 2,000 pounds an acre. In a good year. We farm good years so we can survive the bad ones." "No," Mara said. "My grandmother farmed the bad years so the good ones would not make her stupid." Vernon's face changed then. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to disappointment. "Mara, I cannot make you do it, but I will tell you what nobody else will say at your kitchen table. Your mother kept that seed because it made her feel close to her mother. That is a fine thing. It is not a farm plan." Mara walked to the gate and rested one hand on the top wire. "My mother kept that seed because she knew what it was built for. I am planting it because she was right." Vernon put both hands on his belt and stared at the field. Then he nodded once, got in his truck, and drove away. The first harvest did not settle the argument. It only made the argument harder to laugh at. The Copper Kafir yielded just under 3,000 pounds an acre in 1982. It did not beat the commercial hybrids on gross yield. It was never supposed to. But it needed less nitrogen, less water, and no purchased seed. The grain came in heavier than expected. With a hard, clean kernel, the Dodge City terminal paid a small premium to take. After fuel, fertilizer, repairs, and taxes, Mara cleared more per acre than Vernon did on his high-input blocks that same fall. Vernon said it was a one-year quirk. The co-op men said low input costs could make any small farm look clever for one season. The bank stopped asking questions, which in Ford County counted as respect. For the next 7 years, Mara did not argue. She worked. Every October, she cut the 62 acres. Every winter, she cleaned seed at the kitchen table with the ledger open beside her. Every 5th summer, she planted a refresh plot and walked it with a red string tied around her wrist, marking the weak stalks, the late heads, the plants that looked impressive, until the wind came. By 1985, the jokes had changed shape. Nobody called it a memory garden anymore. They called it unusual. They called it low input. They called it one of those Calder things. That was the polite way of saying they could no longer prove it was foolish. But they still did not want to admit it was smart. In the spring of 1986, a plant breeder named Dr. Ruth Bellwether came from the State Grain Heritage Project. Heard about Mara through a retired extension man who remembered Nola's name from old station records. Dr. Bellwether arrived in a dust-coated sedan with 2 graduate students, a soil probe, and a camera. She asked to walk the field before she came into the house. Mara took her out just after sunrise. The seedlings were only hand-high, but Dr. Bellwether stopped after 20 paces. She knelt in the row and measured the stem at the soil line with a small silver gauge. Then she measured 3 more, then 10 more. When she stood up, her knees were powdered red. "Mrs. Calder," she said, "do you know what you have?" Mara looked at the field. "I know what my mother told me I had." Dr. Bellwether spent 3 days on the place. She photographed the ledger, copied Nola's row notes, measured leaf sheath thickness, checked seed weight, and compared the plant structure against the modern hybrids she knew from trial plots. On the last evening, she sat at Mara's kitchen table and said what the county had avoided saying for 4 years. This is not nostalgia. This is a distinct dryland sorghum line, selected under hail, heat, and wind pressure for longer than most breeding programs keep a single goal alive. The stem crown is roughly 21% wider than the commercial reference plants I brought. The boot sheath is tighter. The leaf surface is tougher. The plant is not trying to win a perfect season. It is trying not to lose a violent one. Mara said nothing. Dr. Bellwether touched the ledger with 2 fingers. "Your grandmother was not preserving the past. She was preserving a trait package the market stopped rewarding." The phrase sounded too clean for what Mara knew. Nola had not preserved a trait package. She had preserved a way to read weather before weather announced itself. The paper Dr. Bellwether later published did not use Mara's name. It referred to her operation as a private cooperating farm in southwest Kansas. The academic world took note for about 3 weeks. A few seed conservation people wrote letters. One professor asked for a sample. Mara sent 2 pounds with a handwritten storage protocol and nothing more. Ford County kept planting hybrids. And then came the summer of 1990. The 3rd week of June began hot and restless. The wind came up before breakfast and did not fully lie down after dark. The air felt charged. Dogs barked at nothing. The wheat stubble shivered in the evening light. On June 21st, by mid-afternoon, a dry line had sharpened west of Dodge City. Thunderheads rose so fast they seemed to build themselves from the ground up. At 5:42 p.m., the first hail report came over the radio. Walnut-sized stones west of Buckland, then larger stones east of Greensburg, then straight-line winds strong enough to peel tin from machine sheds. The storm moved northeast like a blade. At 6:13 p.m., it reached the Calder place. The first hailstone hit the milk shed roof so hard, Mara thought a board had snapped. Then the sound multiplied. The house shook under the barrage. Hail struck the yard, the roof, the empty fuel tank, the hood of the grain truck. The kitchen window cracked across the middle. Wind pushed water under the back door in a thin brown sheet. Mara sat at the table with both hands around a coffee mug she had stopped drinking from. She did not look out, knew what the storm was doing to the field. The only question was whether Nola had known enough. For 23 minutes the storm beat the place flat. At 6:41, the worst of it moved east. Mara waited until the hail softened into rain. Then she pulled on her boots, stepped over glass in the kitchen, and walked to the field gate. The commercial hybrid field south of the road was down, not leaning, down. The stalks lay shredded and slick in the mud. All of them pointed in the same defeated direction. Mara turned toward her 62 acres. The leaves were torn. The heads were bruised. Some stalks leaned hard enough to make the field look bowed. But the rows were still rows. The stems had bent. They had not broken. Mara did not celebrate. Farmers do not celebrate while the weather is still leaving. She walked the first 20 rows and counted damage by hand. Broken stalk, standing stalk, torn leaf, protected boot, bent stem, standing stem. The number she wrote in the ledger that night was 12%. Estimated yield loss, 12%. Across 3 counties, the hybrid losses ran from 78% to total. Vernon Pike's 1,800 acres were hit at the same stage, under the same sky, by the same wall of hail and wind. His crop loss was estimated at 91%. By the next morning, the story had escaped every fence in Ford County. The hybrids were down. Mara Calder's old Kafir was standing. At the co-op, nobody called it a keepsake. At the bank, nobody asked about widow's debt. At the elevator, the men who had spent 8 years explaining yield curves began asking a different question. How much seed did she have? Mara did not answer quickly. She had always sold grain. Seed was different. Seed carried responsibility. Seed could be ruined by careless storage, careless crossing, careless pride. Nola's line had survived because 3 women had treated it less like a product than a discipline. On August 4th, the first farmer came to the gate. It was not Vernon. It was Vernon's son, Ellis Pike, 29 years old, hat in both hands, boots muddy from walking damage claims all morning. "My father does not know I'm here," Ellis said. "We cannot afford to buy new hybrid seed for every acre next spring. I came to ask whether you would sell us Copper Kafir." Mara looked past him toward the road. "What does your father think of that?" Ellis swallowed. "My father is tired enough to be quiet." That was the first honest thing anyone from the Pike operation had said to her about the seed. Mara took him into the kitchen. She opened the ledger. Seed. Mara took him into the kitchen. She opened the ledger. She showed him the seeding rate, the row spacing, the storage rules, the refresh cycle, and the warning written in her mother's hand. Do not breed it for pride, breed it for weather. Ellis read the sentence twice. Mara sold him seed on one condition. She would come set the planter herself, and he would not blend the line with hybrids to improve it. By September, 31 farms had asked. By October, after harvest, Mara had enough cleaned reserve to supply 28 of them. She typed a 12-page growing protocol on Elspeth's old royal typewriter. Every order went out with the same instructions. Density. Do not chase tall yield. Do not skip the refresh cycle. Save seed from the plants that stand when the easy plants fall. In the fall of 1990, the Calder field yielded 2,560 pounds an acre after the storm. It was the lowest yield Mara had taken off that field in 8 seasons. It was also one of the only positive Milo harvests recorded in that part of Ford County that year. The grain paid the bills. The seed orders paid the winter. But the real change came the following October. In 1991, the farms that planted Copper Kafir did not beat the best hybrids on clean yield. They did not need to. They cut input costs, held better through dry wind, and produced enough grain to keep operators from borrowing themselves into another bad spring. The Pike operation planted 600 acres that first year. Vernon came to Mara's gate after harvest, wearing the same clean hat and polished boots, though the man inside them looked older. Mara was oiling the planter tongue when he arrived. He stood on the other side of the gate for nearly a minute before speaking. I was wrong, he said. Mara wiped oil from her fingers with a rag. Vernon looked at the field, then at the ledger lying open on the truck hood. I thought your mother left you a memory, he said. She left you a method. She left you a method. I laughed because the method did not look modern enough to scare me. Mara did not rescue him from the silence. Vernon took off his hat. I came to ask if I can walk the refresh plot with you next summer. Mara closed the ledger. You can walk, she said, but you will not talk through the first pass. That was as close to forgiveness as a gate can sound. The next summer, Vernon Pike walked the refresh plot behind Mara Calder and said nothing for the first 40 minutes. He watched her cut out weak stalks with a pocket knife. He watched her mark late heads with a twist of red string. Watched her choose plants, not for how proud they looked in July, but for how much weather they had already survived. At the end of the row, he said, I never knew selection was this slow. Mara said, that is why it works. The county learned slowly after that. Not all at once. Not with one apology. Not with one storm. It learned through ordinary years, which are the only years that prove whether a system is real. By 1998, Copper Kafir was growing on farms from western Kansas into the Oklahoma Panhandle and eastern Colorado. Mara retired from active farming. More than 170,000 pounds of Calder Copper Kafir seed had passed through her cleaning shed, every order tied to a storage sheet, a seeding rate, and a warning against improving the line until it forgot what it was for. The old flour sack did not stay in the cellar. Mara pressed it flat and framed it behind glass in the kitchen, beside Nola's ledger and Elspeth's note. Visitors always looked at the sack first. They saw the faded handwriting. They saw the repaired seam. They saw the seed stains in the cloth. Mara always watched them reach the same wrong conclusion. They thought the sack mattered because it was old. The sack mattered because it had carried instructions from one dangerous season to another. That was what the county had missed in 1982. They had seen an old woman's seed. They had seen a widow's grief. They had seen a lower yield curve. They had not seen the map. Mara Calder had never promised that Copper Kafir would win every year. She had promised something more useful. When the sky turned violent, it would still be there in the morning. And in farming, that is sometimes the only number that matters. The seed had not been waiting for praise. It had been waiting for weather.